Good afternoon. It is October 21st. We're here for a joint committee session of the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee, as well as the Education and Culture Committee, here with my co-chair and committee colleague, wearing two hats today, Councilmember and Chair Jawanda, who both serves on the Planning, Housing, and Parks Committee and chairs the Education and Culture Committee. We are here to discuss the co-location of a project as part of and pursuant to Bill 3322, which was a bill that I authored at the end of the last council that carried over to this council. I like to joke that it was the most co-sponsored and supported bill in Montgomery County history. I think that is factual, although it's because several council members co-sponsored it from the prior council and several council members joined to co-sponsor it in the new council, and so it exceeded co-sponsorships to the number of council members that we had. But ultimately, we really prioritize and continue to prioritize co-locating housing that we desperately want and desperately need on public land that we desperately need and scarcely have enough of, and want to send a strong signal understanding the realities of the housing challenges that we face and the scarcity of land that is before us, that Montgomery County as a government needs to lead not just by the example of its power, but by the power of our example. And that includes leveraging our own resources and our own assets in order to achieve the type of housing that we want and that we need so that we can be an inclusive community that we frequently talk about. The Education and Culture Committee has already reviewed the inclusion of the Clarksburg Library in the CIP, a project we all support to serve the growing population of the community in Clarksburg, something that we know is very much in need and very much demanded, and we are welcomed and do welcome and are joined today by the district council member who is advocating and continues to advocate for that community in her district. Councilmember Balcom, welcome. Thank you. And we're here to really learn about the process, this process that has been undertaken on this particular effort. And, you know, while this is a library project, it's really a Department of General Services implementation as our landlord and our project manager in many cases. The libraries are the client, but really the project is overseen as all of our public projects are. And so thank you to Greg Assant for being here as well. And we're also joined by Department of Housing and Community Affairs to talk about the housing piece as well. So thank you for joining us, to DGS and to DHCA and to the executive branch. We really appreciate it. With that, let me turn it over to Councilmember Jawanda if he has any initial comments, if any other council colleagues, and then I'm going to turn it over and we can walk through the item. Councilmember Jawanda and co-chair.
Thank you, Council President and co-chair. Really glad we're here to take this next step, and I was one of the many co-sponsors on that bill. And earlier, as the Council President will remember, earlier that year, I put forth a budget amendment to make sure at the Chevy Chase Library that we looked at affordable housing and housing there. So I think this is something that is in line with a lot of the direction we've given DGS to do when we're co-locating at public facilities, particularly some of our most highly trafficked facilities like libraries. So really excited to get the update, really excited for this to move forward, and appreciate my co-chair. Back to you.
Great. So we're going to learn about the various housing assessments that were done and the analysis that was conducted by the Department of General Services, and hear about the different typologies ranging from 24 townhomes to 64 multifamily units, and look forward to some question and answer. With that, let me turn it over to Mr. Ambinder, and you can walk us through the packet and turn it over to our colleagues in the executive branch as needed.
Good afternoon. As Chair Friedson mentioned, the Bill 3322, which was enacted in January 2023, requires that DGS submit for applicable capital projects an affordable housing feasibility study that consists of the 8 items that are outlined on page 1 of your packet, all 8 of which have their own subheading in the study that was transmitted for the Clarksburg Library. Within 30 days of receiving a study, the council, per the legislation, must review it and determine by a vote whether to approve or disapprove that analysis. This study for the Clarksburg Library was received on October 11th. As the chair recapped, the council, as part of the FY25 to 30 CIP review, approved an FY24 supplemental appropriation for this project to provide for the evaluation and purchase of a site, as well as an acceleration of the design contract. That purchase of this site has now been completed. So to that end, the study provided for the Clarksburg Library details the feasibility of co-location of affordable housing on the new site at the corner of Maryland 355 and Stringtown Road, where the development of the library is proceeding. The study indicates that in addition to this alternate site providing operational advantages from a library's perspective, the site will provide greater opportunities for co-location of affordable housing relative to the original site. There are a number of housing test fits attached at circles 7 through 15 of your packet that do provide additional details regarding the possible housing typologies for the site. I'll say, as far as this particular study goes, council staff does recommend that the committee recommend council approval of the study as transmitted by DGS. The committee may also be interested in having a broader discussion of the affordable housing feasibility studies in general, since this is the first study of its type that's been transmitted under this new law. That could include more details of the timing of the transmittal of the study, the details that the council would like to see provided by DGS for future iterations of the study, as well as the extent to which the council would like to understand more about the economic feasibility of potential future housing options co-located with other projects. So with that, again, council staff does recommend approval of this particular study. I'm happy to turn it back over to the chairs, the co-chairs, or turn it over to DGS for comments.
Mr. Assam, Ms. Warner, any comments or additional information that you'd like to share at this time?
Briefly, thank you. Greg Austin, Department of General Services. Thanks for the opportunity to come over and talk about this today. This is legislation, as the Council President knows, that DGS had quite a bit of input on as it was formulated, and we know that there were lots of co-sponsors. But the reality is that this is the executive's wish as well, that all capital projects look at the feasibility of affordable housing. And so a lot of our input during the process was that we have the information available. We're going through this analysis regardless, and how can we bolster that analysis and then send it over for council review, and how do we formulate that? So as Logan mentioned, this is the first one that we've sent over, so we are looking for input and feedback on not just the format of the information, but the amount of information, the details, et cetera, and how we can improve upon that project by project. Because this Clarksburg Library project sought an alternative site, and council went through a lot of deliberations as we proposed a different site, not just to achieve a better library product in the end, but also to accommodate additional affordable housing. And so a lot of this information you've seen before, but we did include the test fits that we used as part of that analysis. Those might be new, and we're able to talk about those and answer any questions. So thank you.
Appreciate that. Just wanted to learn the Bill 3322 included as one of the components to the affordable housing feasibility study the projected total cost for construction, including, if any, costs of co-location of affordable housing. Is that part of this analysis?
So the cost of construction of the capital project is included in the PDF. So we have the cost of the library project itself. We don't have the cost. We don't have any cost information on projections of the actual housing itself. So we don't have that part of it at this time. So we don't know how much the housing is going to cost.
Is there any projections or analysis of that? Has that work begun yet?
It has not begun yet. And as Logan mentioned in his packet, we're not even certain as to what product type would go here. we've been solely focused on getting the design underway of the library project and being very careful to preserve as much land as possible. The test fits that are in the packet give you a sense of what's going to be required, but until we get through that preliminary site engineering and get through park and planning in terms of getting the footprint of the library established, all of the infrastructure needed to accommodate the library, we won't have the building envelope for the affordable housing fully understood and therefore be able to generate reliable cost estimates associated with its development. So that's really what we're waiting for. It'll be sequential, but we're learning along the way and going to learn a lot about the site as we continue the design process. So it's just lagging behind just a little bit.
Yeah, as the author of the bill and someone who's involved in all the conversations, I think the interest in co-location, specifically on a project-by-project basis, was imagined to be concurrent. It was thought to be a process that would, at least in many cases, yield housing and a public use, in this case a library, in one structure, in one complex, in one building. It appears that every time we hear about the possibility of co-location, the net result has been the public facility, the public use, and then another part of the same property or parcel that may or may not be housing at some point at a later date, or could be considered for housing at a later date. That's different. It doesn't treat land with the scarcity that the bill was intended. And it doesn't treat land with the scarcity, I think, that reflects the reality in the county. I just am curious, does the executive branch, foresee any scenario where we would incorporate housing into projects on a regular basis, would stack public use and housing on top of each other, like in many urbanizing and urban communities, in order to reflect the reality of the scarcity of land, the problem that the bill was intending to solve? Could you just speak to that for a moment?
Certainly. Yeah, as a matter of fact, and I don't want to go reach too far back on this particular project, but that was one of the challenges that we dealt with at the town center site. We were dealing with about an acre of land and trying to get a library and affordable housing onto the site. One of the scenarios was we created a mixed-use project. And based on those realities, not just the cost, which was really secondary, it was the yield of affordable units that you could get out of the project at that point by creating 2 elevator lobbies and 2 stairwells and that sort of thing. And it really ate into the library program, putting the library on not just 2 floors, but ultimately 3 floors, and then trying to do something in scale with the neighborhood above that. We looked at a standalone building in the parking lot next to the library for a multifamily product, but the yields weren't there. Certainly, as part of our facility planning and, more importantly, site selection for future capital projects, we take those things into consideration. In this particular case, in Clarksburg, creating a mixed-use project on a fairly small piece of land on the corner of Stringtown and 355 was not something that we considered just because it's out of character with the rest of the neighborhood. We didn't run through feasibility of doing housing on top of the library at this location, just because we had enough land to yield, and hence the test fits that are included in your packet, to yield a meaningful number of units and not impact the timeline of the library, which was also a consideration in this particular CIP project. But that is not to say, and I think that the short answer to your question in a roundabout kind of way is, we absolutely look at creating mixed-use projects out of our capital projects. Whether that is deemed feasible, I think you've heard before, both Director Dice and I have said on many occasions that a lot of things are feasible. We will rarely come to the committees and suggest that affordable housing is not feasible for any particular reason. it really just boils down to the amount of, or the cost of the project, the cost of doing so. And you'll recall, as a district council member for the White Flint Fire Station, the conversations that we've had with that project, where it was envisioned to have residential above, a fire station, and turn that into a mixed-use project. And for a number of reasons, cost being a considerable one, we ended up with two projects, still co-located but separate buildings. But certainly, yes, and we will do it again with Chevy Chase. As you know, we've looked at that already, and that'll be a future project that you'll be reviewing in this context as well. So short answer, yes, of course we will. In this particular case, we did not, for the reasons that we've outlined.
So just to be clear, it doesn't work in a transit-served urbanizing area like North Bethesda. It doesn't work in a area that has less transit and is further out from the urban core like Germantown. Can you name specific future projects that you believe that mixed use with housing and public uses in the same footprint would be something that the department and the executive branch would be seriously pursuing?
Yeah, I think one project that comes to mind is the Wheaton Arts and Cultural Center. That's obviously an urban area served by Metro and other transit ride-on in particular, and that is a more recent example of the co-location of an arts and cultural center as the ground floor of a mixed-use development with affordable housing partnership with Montgomery Housing Partnership. In terms of future capital projects, we can go back and look. Of course, you will see them all as part of the budget and as part of these feasibility programs. I'll have to review the facility planning to see what we've got in the works. The 4th District Police Station is a future capital project that is in the facility planning stages at this time, and there are a few others. We can take a look at those. But ultimately, we are putting together and formulating the affordable housing feasibility studies for those projects at the same time as we're working through facility planning. So you'll have those as well. I just can't rattle them off the top of my head.
Yeah, the concern continues to be that there's always a reason not to do it, and that consideration is important, but consideration at a certain point begins to feel like an afterthought. And the whole purpose of the bill was to make it a forethought, not an afterthought. And it doesn't appear like up to this point we've really changed that in a considerable way. Having said that, I am a strong supporter of ensuring that the Clarksburg community gets their library. I'm not going to vote against supporting moving this forward, and I appreciate all of the considerable advocacy that Councilmember Balcom in particular has done, as well as the members of the Education and Culture Committee on the library project itself. But I will express my frustration and concern that there was a purpose for why the council put forward the bill, and up to this point, the primary purpose has not been carried out to fidelity. And I would hope that as we move forward, that there is a much more serious look at true co-location of housing as part of public use projects on public land. And it is nice for the private sector to bear the brunt of housing. It is understandable that when there are opportunities to partner, that we have public space within private sector communities and buildings, of which we've done several recently, and DGS deserves a lot of credit for figuring out how to execute those in very complicated ways through important and critical partnerships. But at a certain point, we need to rethink the way that we do public projects, and I think up to this point we haven't really rethought it. We've slightly changed a little bit, and 24 to 64 units helps, but it's not quite at the level that we were anticipating and would have hoped.
So again, this is the first one that we brought over, and we certainly appreciate all of the feedback that we're receiving. But as the first project to come over, the answers across the board are yes, it's feasible, and not just feasible, but we're going to do it. and here's what it might look like, and here's how it can happen. And we've gone out of our way to reserve enough room to do a meaningful number of units in Clarksburg. But I do want to get some clarification on the spirit and intent portion of your comments, because if the inference is that, and this is not what the regulation says currently, but if the inference is to turn every county capital project into a mixed-use development to include affordable housing, that's quite a different conversation than the way that the regulations currently state. Co-location doesn't necessarily need to be a mixed-use project. Turning all of our capital projects into mixed-use projects with housing or childcare, for that matter, as we also do feasibilities, is a very different conversation than what is reflected in the bill. And so we would need to take that back and get some guidance on how to formulate or respond to that notion, because that is quite a different study than what we are preparing on some of these projects, and will undoubtedly, in every circumstance, double, triple, quadruple the costs of county capital projects, but just by the nature of turning them into mixed-use projects. So I want to be real clear about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and what the expectations are.
I think it certainly was the intention that we would be presented as an option, and it would not necessarily be an always, but it would at least be a sometimes. And it seems like, and your comments reflect the fact that it is getting increasingly close to it pretty much never. And that's the concern, and that's the problem that I have. Final question, let me turn it to colleagues after that. The range of 24 to 64 units and the different typologies that are reflected here, of which we don't really have much of a plan or a cost estimate, who is involved in making that decision? Is Department of Housing and Community Affairs going to be involved? Are there other folks within the executive branch or beyond that will be involved in making that determination and presenting something to the council?
Yeah, it's a bit of all of the above response, Councilmember Friedson. The Department of General Services, as you know, is not an affordable housing developer, and so we would expect that at some point we bring on a affordable housing partner to facilitate the housing. In doing so, that obviously turns the property into a property disposition action. So it will involve not just our colleagues at DHCA and the rest of our executive branch colleagues, but also the council. And so I think the conversations that we have with council staff, Logan and his colleagues, we'd love to get some feedback, albeit informal, as to the expectations. I think we read you loud and clear on the number of units, try to yield as many units as possible. But if for some reason the collective wisdom of the council is you don't want to see townhouses, you'd rather see duplexes or 2-over-2s or multifamily in lieu of all of those things, that's certainly feedback that we can take back to our colleagues and discuss, so that we're not bringing forth proposals that don't meet the desired outcome.
Appreciate that. The housing challenges we face are getting worse and worse by the day, and utilizing land, in this case underutilizing land potentially, by going out and not potentially up or not reaching levels of density, has to be part of that serious consideration. That's what the bill was reflecting. That's what I am trying to channel here, and I hope that it is very much within the intention of the executive branch to pursue that with seriousness and with fidelity. Let me turn it over to colleagues. I'll start with my co-chair, Councilmember Joanna.
Thank you. Appreciate that. This is the first one. You're trying to figure it out, and as you said, take feedback back and improve upon them. I do think when the affordable housing feasibility study, which is what the underlying bill was, which is also consistent with, again, what I asked for in the CIP, change the budget amendment for the Chevy Chase Library, is we want to look at, across all available options. Notwithstanding your point that if you do, to do a mixed use option and everything is going to be cost prohibitive in many instances, and and require, a lot of taxpayer dollars in addition to developer funding, and there's so much that goes into it. Is there, obviously building affordable housing. I often say building housing is, particularly affordable housing and mixed use, is a million things have to come together, all these different funding streams, and so it's a lot to it. But I do think that we should look at, even if it's to say this is what it would be, it would be this much cost, and we think it would create that, but based on the land and what's there, you should analyze it. It should be part of the analysis. The decision on what actually goes there, obviously, that's a different question based on what is affordable, where there's interest, what the market will bear, what the county executive thinks, what housing thinks, what council members think, and that's a back and forth. And you've acknowledged that, but I do think that while we do have needs across the board in housing, we want to just have everything before us, and I think that's what you're hearing. So I don't ascribe any ill intent to it at all. This, like I said, this is the first one, and I do, as the NC committee, I want to get this library built. So I do think it's a fair point to bring up that we don't want to hold up the library to try to get the perfect deal, but we do want these things to be considered concurrently as much as possible. So if there are specific suggestions that you have now or in the future about how the bill or the regulation would need to be updated to reflect what I've just said, or what you're if you agree with what I just said, and I'm going to ask you that question specifically, I'd want to hear what those things are. As I read the bill, require the county executive to submit an affordable housing feasibility study to the council for certain capital projects, establish a review process for the council. We're sitting here doing that now. And so, but as far as the specifics, as Council President mentioned, projected total cost, again, you don't know that until you know what exactly you're doing. Whether there needs to be some, a definition of co-location, right? Because you kind of went into that a little bit. And I agree with how you defined it. I agree co-location could mean a lot of different things, not just one type of entity, like, if you think of Silver Spring Library, or not, excuse me, the library got renamed. Right. That's right. General McGee Library. Not everything can do that, but we talked about how the Wheaton Cultural Arts Center is an example where that might be possible, and is possible, and it's something that we could do. So I just think it's put everything out there, and not through the lens of what the county executive may or may not want. This bill requires, let's look at it all, and then let's talk about and have a real discussion about what may or may not be feasible. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And from a staff perspective at DGS, we look at it and read the bill, and the bill says what it needs to say, which is we submit it to the council, you review it. If it's not good enough, you send us back to the drawing board. And the inference is that you want it. The executive is aligned with that objective. We all are. And that if we haven't made the case well enough or presented enough scenarios, then you don't approve it, and we go back and we put more touches on it. You brought up Chevy Chase, and I can assure you that we will run you through a number of scenarios that we have explored and the costs associated with them. We will have that information. We have it. We're putting it together. And when we present that project, it's been obviously delayed and it's a few years out, but when we do bring it back, you'll have that information to do that comparison, what a standalone infill project is versus turning it into a mixed-use project and that sort of thing. So we will have that that information available. And this is, again, it's good feedback. And I think it's too early to start suggesting that we need to tweak the regulation. I think the regulation is just fine the way that it is and does what it's set to accomplish. And ultimately, the council reviews it and provides feedback, and we take that back and we make it better the next time. So,
yeah, and again, I think you have done. This is the first time you're coming back. The only thing I would add is just let's look at everything that's possible. And again, if I like the blue sky things. People should know. What it costs to do what some people might want, and who has to bear that. The discussion of who bears that cost and how you move forward and is it feasible is all part of the feasibility discussion. So appreciate what you've done. I like some of the test fits that you've laid out, but that would be the constructive feedback I give. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me turn it over to the aforementioned district council member, Councilmember Bauckham.
Thank you. Thank you for presenting this. And so I think that what is the definition of co-location, I think it is important to really define. This, from the expectation, this is exactly what I expected to see after the discussion that we had during the budget of what the library would look like and why the original site wasn't going to work. And so we had lengthy discussions about stacking on that site and why it wouldn't work, and the purchase of this second piece of property that would afford additional units. So I think that this is what I was expecting to see. So I think if we have some global understanding of what that definition of co-location is, and I think that the importance, certainly for me, is the schedule of this. Unlike future projects, this project, the library was moving forward right at the time that this bill was passed. And so future projects, when those projects are first envisioned, they will be envisioned with the idea of how housing will be fit into that. When we realized that these two things were going to collide, the bill and this library, we had to delay the project for a year, with the idea that the feasibility study would be done and then we would move forward. And so I think that I agree with Council President Friedson that we really need to look at the blue sky options and what all the options are. I think that a lot of that work had been done when we assessed the original site. So I'm really excited about the possibility of what's going to go there. I think the more units, the better. And especially this location, because it will be right on eventually transit. It's on bus route, but in the future it'll be on a BRT route as well. So I'm just looking forward to it moving forward. So thank you.
Well, just to clarify, I will say I inferred it, but I believe my co-chair, Councilmember Joanno, actually said the blue sky, so I want to give credit where it's due. Appreciate Councilmember Balcom for all of your effective advocacy. I'll just reiterate the idea of having all of the options presented, the costs and the challenges and the timing as part of that discussion is what we intend, is what we want. I don't think we need to have a definition of co-location, because co-location should include both. It should be, here's what it looks like side by side, if that's feasible, and here's what it looks like on top of one another, and here's what that would cost, here's what that would mean, here's what the logistical challenges are, here's what the time constraints would be. The intention here was for the council, as the policymakers, to be involved in the process and for there to be a level of accountability, because we know once we build something like this, it's there for 50, 60, 70 years. We don't have a chance to redo this. Certainly not in our lifetimes, much less our terms here in office and our service to the public and each and every hardworking member of our executive branch team. So that's the intention, that's the goal, that's what I would expect moving forward. It doesn't have to be a totally refined, here's the exact plan and here's the, to the cent of what it would cost today. But a general thought and a preliminary analysis of orders of magnitude of what we'd be talking about in terms of timing and in terms of cost. That was the intention. I think the bill is fine personally. I think that the regulation is fine. I think that the question is, how do we move forward together, think through how this worked this time, understand that this was already somewhat out of the station as this process was unfolding, and I recognize that and appreciate that. But we do have to get this right, because we don't have second and third chances when it comes to the scarcity of public land to address our housing challenges and our other public needs as well. Let me turn it to Councilmember Albernaz here, and we'll turn it to him now.
Thanks. I'm just going to speak at a very high level here. This is an important conversation. This is the first project out of the gates, as has been noted, and I was a proud co-sponsor of this bill along with numerous colleagues. And I do think that the council president has made the intent of the bill very clear, which I appreciate. And I also know, and as you noted, Mr. Asant, that there was a lot of really good feedback from the Department of General Services throughout the development of that bill. But I also acknowledge, and you mentioned this earlier, you all are not housing experts. And so I do think, and the term feasibility is pretty loose and is really sort of in the eyes of the beholder. When we do get the options back for the Chevy Chase Library, none of them will be inexpensive. And will have to be, if we do decide to move forward, figure out how to fit that into an already overstuffed CIP. So, and I know that you all have had to take time to seek consultation from people who are housing experts, which has added time, but there's tremendous source of frustration within the Chevy Chase Library community right now, because we're now 3 years past when we told the community there was an actual line item project to renovate that library, and it could frankly be years more down the line before this is all resolved. So we don't want projects to take, decades to develop also. So it's a fine line and something we're going to have to continue to revisit and refine. But I just wanted to make those general comments, but look forward to supporting this project, which I know everyone has been looking forward to for a very long time.
Appreciate the comments and the perspective as somebody who used to be in charge of a department that had a lot of facilities that needed to go through processes like these. I just will note on the Chevy Chase Library aspect, since it was noted by my colleague to my right and my colleague to my left, the delay on the Chevy Chase Library project has nothing to do with the housing feasibility or childcare feasibility, and everything to do with the fact that it was envisioned as a very small project to do a minor, modest renovation, essentially a facelift. And once some even preliminary analysis was done, it was very clear that the amount of work and the scale and scope and magnitude of the needs in that facility, a library that has largely gone unchanged since my mother went there as her local library as a kid, the recognition was this is a much bigger job. And the big questions then become, okay, what do we do now? And how do we pay for it? And what is the timing of it? So I just want to be clear. I don't want to get caught up in the narrative that the housing feasibility is what has caused a delay to a library that many people that I represent and many people in my community care very deeply about. I also care very deeply about. I've been to that library a number of times, as I know several colleagues have as well. The issue that we have is there are major ADA issues that are hugely expensive. There are major structural issues that are extremely expensive. This is not a place that needs nicer fixtures and some added amenities. This is a building and a structure that really no longer serves the needs of the community in a functional way and requires a lot of money and a lot of thought in order to figure out how to move forward. With that, I don't see any other colleagues wishing to speak. We have an affordable housing feasibility study on the Clarksburg Library, a project that a lot of people have spent a lot of time advocating for and are excited to see move forward. With that, I will entertain a vote to approve the affordable housing feasibility study. All those in favor? And that is unanimous, with the enthusiastic onlooker of a district council member offering her unofficial but enthusiastic support as well. We've approved the affordable housing feasibility study. Look forward to continuing to work together with the executive branch to figure out how we meet these myriad of public policy interests and public goals all together as one county government working together in conjunction with our community. With that, we are adjourned from our joint committee hearing. I appreciate everybody joining us.